Welcome everyone, and thank you for coming out to our fourth lecture of 2025. Big thank you to AIA Nebraska, who serves as our partner in the design lecture series. Also a huge thank you to all of our sponsors who support us in the lecture series. If you're an architect and you need CEU credits, please scan the sheets out in the lobby. I'll leave them out there post lecture. Okay, let me introduce tonight's speaker, Hunter Knight. Hunter is a registered architect in California and North Carolina. He received a Master of Architecture from Southern California Institute of Architecture, graduating with distinction and receiving the AIA Henry Adams Gold Medal. He has held lecture positions for architectural design at the University of Southern California, Cal Poly Pomona, École Spéciale d'Architecture, and assisted with design studios at SciArc. Prior to forming Weather Projects, he practiced with Morphosis Architects as lead designer on large-scale institutional and commercial projects, including the Fair Tower in Paris, the competition-winning entry for the Casablanca Finance City Tower in Casablanca, and the Cornell New York City Tech Building in New York. Hunter has lived and worked in Paris, New York, and Los Angeles. His art practice deliberately deviates from the constraints of architecture, exploring his interests in sensation, memory, and intuition. Working primarily with responsibly harvested wood from Los Angeles's urban forests and surrounding neighborhoods. His pieces embody both his technical precision and deep connection to material and place. Please welcome Hunter.
Hi everyone. I know you guys kicked Tom Main out of here to have me speak, so that's really quite a pleasure. No, but obviously Tom couldn't make it, so thank you so much for inviting me. Ross, Tom, Mike, all of the Maple Construct crew, happy to be here. So tonight's lecture is out of practice and out of ideas, and this is truly how I feel a lot of the times. You know, you start a project, you start an office, a phase of an office, and you're like, what the hell am I doing, right? Like, do I have the right idea about what I'm doing? Am I out of practice? You get these feelings of anxiety about kind of where you're at. But in many ways, kind of reaching those points in one's career, you realize that the phases of practice, the ideas you've been working through, maybe they reach an end, and that's a new way to kind of, a new phase, a new way to think about moving forward. So I'm going to talk about my experience of working out new ways to practice and forming new ideas about how to operate. And today's market is really turbulent in architecture, and you know, we just had this huge fire in LA, and you know, big chunks of LA just burned down. So I really want to think about kind of what is practice now, what are our ideas now, and what are the models for, you know, how we kind of think about moving forward. Tonight I'll talk through some of my architecture, some of my buildings, and I'll also touch on my art practice, and I'll show some examples of this work. And I've got these kind of phases of the office that I'm going to show, and kind of different ways my office has kind of changed as my practice has changed, as ideas have changed. So like Ross mentioned, I came from SciArc, got my master's degree there in 2006. And after finishing SciArc, I immediately joined Morphosis. And Tom was kind of a hero to me and in my early days of architecture, and so landing that job was a total dream job, right? Tom had just won the Pritzker, and when I joined the office, he had no work. He couldn't find anything. But there was this competition, Tour Fair Tower in Paris that they were working on, and I came in at the tail end, helped with the competition, and then we won it, which is amazing, and I ended up moving to Paris and becoming part of the project team. The tower is located outside of Paris because no towers are actually allowed in Paris besides Tour Montparnasse, and if you're Herzog Dimmeron, you can build a tower in Paris apparently, but we couldn't, so we were ostracized to La Défense. And this site is like a total non-site. If you look at it, you've got a freeway, but below that's a tram line. There's this pedestrian bridge that's kind of crossing the freeway. And then there's this like beautiful old pure nervy shell that's part of the site. And our job is really to kind of glue together the pure nervy shell as well as this commercial tower, because it was owned by the developer. So you get a better idea of that site. Where's the building, right? Where are you going to put a building? And this is the tower. It's comprised of four components. There's the main tower, which is 70 stories. There's kind of this mid-rise, which is for the trading floors. And then there's the trapeze, which is kind of this mid-tower. And it's got like the cafeteria, amenities, and certain services for it. And then there's this pavilion. And that actually connects to it's kind of gluing together the plaza and bringing people into the building. So there's like a 90-second escalator ride into the tower. And Tom was really interested in a tower that was kind of like a Rodin sculpture, and that everywhere you viewed it around the city, you would get a kind of different silhouette. And so from this perspective, Notre Dame is just there to the left, and you're looking off in the distance, and that high point in the skyline is Tour Phare. So we're looking at architecture, I'm looking at architecture, I'm thinking about architecture as like skyline, urban, and as icon at this stage. This is a view down the Seine. It's kind of the axial building there. This is in La Défense, so you start to see how it's kind of composed. And again, thinking about that idea of Rodin, right? Like you're starting to see these different silhouettes of the tower. This is the Grand Arch, that's the nervy shell, that's our tower. And then axial, you're locating back to Arc de Triomphe. This is it at night. So I worked on this tower for 4 years, and the CEO changed. It was like $800 million to $1 billion to build this, and the CEO changed. It was like, nope, project was done. 4 years working on the tower, we moved on. So I ended up moving to New York in 2010, and I was part of the competition team. I was running the competition for this project, which is a commercial tower located in Casablanca. It's actually located in the Anfa district, which was an airport, now defunct and made into a commercial center. And again, we're thinking about this as an icon. And so we're talking about like what is an icon, and how do we kind of like think about iconic skylines? And of course, like we're in New York, and the Chrysler Building is there, and it was really kind of an inspirational moment to think about what is a crown, right, as a skyline? Like what does the crown mean as an icon to the skyline? And what happens when you flip it and it becomes at the pedestrian level? And so giving this kind of remarkable form and gesture along the street as well. This actually got built, and we won the competition with this design, beating out OMA and Zaha Hadid. And so super stoked. This was the first competition I had ran and won. And this is the built form in context. It has this kind of concrete brise-soleil, and this is the crown. It has a curtain wall that kind of extends past the mechanical layers of the top floors. And then this is the base, which is interesting because towers are actually, you can think of as kind of cantilevered columns. And as you taper something, right, there's just a ton of forces that get driven into the ground. So tapering the bottom of that tower took some real structural wizardry. And this looks like a rendering, but it's not. It's at the base of the tower. So I'm also going to walk through kind of lessons learned of each kind of phase of working at Morphosis or working in my office. So some of my lessons learned working at Morphosis was that, large scale they have real impacts on the city. And it's also a large canvas to kind of work through architectural ideas, circulation, program, ideas about how a building fits into a skyline or cities and how it responds to those conditions. Morphosis always was really good at like kind of asking questions with its projects. What can be challenged with architecture? What are we building? What are the politics of the place? How can the program kind of be reshuffled to consider its user or greater context surrounding a kind of socioeconomic or socio-political view. And these are also like unicorn clients, right? Like, meaning they're super rare. They wanted a building to be something, out of the ordinary and really ambitious. So hiring someone like Morphosis, kind of fit their program, but also, you're competing, right, against all these other architects for these unicorn clients. At the office, the work tempo is very fast-paced, it's nuanced, challenging at every point. You're constantly chasing innovation, and new ways of understanding programs, building technologies and aesthetics. And while all these things are really satisfying as such, like large scale means the teams kind of operate in silos, and they become specialized in particular areas of the building. And so you don't really necessarily understand or experience the whole cycle of the design process or the building process. And this is kind of another problem, right? It's you kind of have this rare soup to nuts experience, meaning you might be on the front end of a project but never see it through construction. And so you kind of end up with this myopic view of what a building is, what architecture is. All right, so phase one. I started my career on my own around 2014, and I left Morphosis for like a couple reasons. I felt like I had kind of learned all I could at this point, and I was ready to start a firm and do work on my own terms. But also I was severely burnt out. I've been working on large buildings for quite a while in far-flung places, and it just didn't feel rewarding anymore. I was always chasing deadlines, and I didn't feel like I was actually finishing anything. So my ambition was to grow an office to about 15 people, and I kind of wanted to emulate what Morphosis had, and naively, that's what I was trying to emulate. And I wanted to work on medium-sized commercial, hospitality, and institutional projects. So again, I established my office, Weather, in 2014, and the name came from a desire to be contextual and responsive to local conditions. So this is a map kind of looking at my scale at Morphosis. It's kind of a global scale, US, Europe, Middle East, Asia. And this is my new scale in Los Angeles. I live in Northeast LA. I have an intimate knowledge of the neighborhoods of the city, and I'm practicing within a context where I live, and felt like something that was just something I was much more interested in and could directly invest in. Around the time I started my office, we got really lucky, and we got this offer to work on this kind of private club, kind of like a Soho House, which is like a members only. They started in London. They have kind of an artist program, and it was a great opportunity. Like Commune was doing the interiors for the team, and they'd done all the Ace hotels, and it had cachet, and so we're like, let's get it, let's go after it, right? And we were actually the fourth architect on this project. The others had either been fired or quit because the clients were kind of total disasters and really tough to manage and work with. But it was a really cool opportunity. So we signed this like totally flimsy contract that we should have never signed. And spoiler alert, we ended up getting sued for this project. Like, it was just like crazy. But beyond that, 10-story hotel, that's the hotel component in the back. There was this existing unreinforced masonry building, which you can see in the front. And then there's this kind of glass cube up front. That's the artist in residency program. At the top is a penthouse, 2 penthouse suites and a pool. And conceptually, we came in not to like reorganize the building because the partie was already done, but we were looking at changing some of the massing and subtly changing facades and kind of massaging what was there. And we're really interested in trying to like take what was previously designed and create kind of a coherent whole, even though we had these kind of disparate elements. This is the entry lobby. We worked on these kind of bridges, and the bridges are like, they're a nod to Lena Bobardi's Pompeia, and then added some other elements in that space to kind of amplify some of the there's a lot of creatives coming to this space. It was like we wanted a really kind of intense, dynamic space when you walked in. That's the artist cube above, artist in residency cube above, and then in the back you can see the original unreinforced masonry. And then the white is a elevator core going up to the penthouse. serving the hotel floors. This is the top penthouse. So you have this kind of curving glass and this cantilever roof that spills over the space, and it kind of softly hugs the pool. And again, it's like these different languages trying to find contrast with the rectilinear and playing off of the contrast, but also kind of tying together the spaces. But at that point, this was in the office for 2 years, and then we had this like major eruption with the clients, and the clients couldn't find a flag for the hotel or investors for the hotel, and it died. But at that point, I had kind of built up staff, and so the office is humming, so we keep going after different typologies, different types of projects. And this is the second kind of medium scale project was for Virgin Orbit. And Virgin Orbit, they're like trying to democratize satellite deployment into space. And they were really interested in how do you take the garage guy that's creating a little research project in the satellite that's tiny and also satisfy the people over here that have like giant satellites and get them all into space. And so the big guy over here doesn't pay actually, but the economy of bringing all these together allows kind of a democratization of the garage guy versus the more professional satellites. So they were building rockets, they were launching stuff into space, and they really wanted to. Virgin is very much about user experience, and like the brand of Virgin is like cool and interesting, and like they do like airlines, right, that are like really fun to fly on. So they had the space that was for the production of rockets, but they wanted to be able to have this user experience. So they hired us. We actually were kind of put in a competition for them, and kind of shortlisted by a friend of mine. And we ended up beating out like Gensler and HOK, and we were super stoked because this is such a nutty project. But anyway, they had a 40,000 square foot existing warehouse, and they were looking to kind of add additional program. And the main program was clean rooms, and clean rooms are like typically really devoid of humanity. So they have no humidity, they have no dust, they have no magnetic rays. And so old space, which Virgin was like, we can't do this because it's not human, it's a terrible, I actually like this, I think it looks really cool, I totally worked there, but they're like, it's gotta be cool, it's gotta be fun, it's gotta be interesting. So we're like, okay, old space, the model of old space is out, right? We gotta make like clean rooms really fun because this is where everybody's working. So old space is out. And for Virgin, new space is interconnected, it's innovative, it's multi-layered, it's efficient, has new horizons, it's democratic, it's for everyone. So new space equals new spaces. And we came up with this idea of like space disco. We're like, Virgin, it's a little nod to their early beginnings as a record company. We wanted the project to have this kind of like hospitality element, akin to Virgin's brand, but delivering really high-performing spaces. They were also just like super fun to be in. So we wanted people to like totally freak out and dance, and like while they're dancing, like their rockets are going into the air, right? And really have fun while they're involved in this like whole process of loading satellites and shooting rockets into space. So this is the basic layout. You can see there's a circular clean room up front, and then there's 3 others in light blue. One of them is for the government, so it had like a kind of a high clearance zone. And then the ground floor also has a mission control that is actually launching the rockets or showing the launching of rockets. And then there's kind of this like user experience, which I'll take you through in imagery. The second floor has a lounge, and that kind of wraps around the circular clean room. There's a bar, and there's kind of this little terrace that looks over the launch zone, the mission control. And so this is the kind of in 3D, this is basically the way it's organized. So you can kind of see that circular clean room and the lounge. And then the double height space off to the left is the mission control area. And then 2 clean rooms at the back. So you approach the entry, it's kind of this really normative kind of reception. And then you come to this, we nicknamed this upside down space, kind of like a nod to Stranger Things, but it has this like highly reflective floor, a diffused ceiling, and all this imagery of, past launches, proposed launches, and all the metrics of the launch missions. You kind of go down this galley, and you end up in this space, which is a hallway that's dividing the two clean rooms. On the left is the circular clean room, and we devised this, this gantry that rotates in 360, and so you can pick up your rockets and like move them around. And we also have these little dots on the floor, which can be reprogrammed for different types of lighting scenarios. But the dots they're performative in like a playful way, but they're also registration marks for precise location of things they're putting into space, not literally into space up here, but space on the floor. Because they used to use like tape. So we were kind of playing with like different lighting scenarios. We're playing in section, right? We're blowing up this, this volume up, so you have this, sectionally you have all these views down onto what's going on in the two clean rooms. And then we also landscaped the hallway, so it kind of has this like softer, more ephemeral feel against the harshness of the clean rooms. And this is up top. This is the lobby space. So we have these kind of reflective ceilings, and again, these kind of like disco-y moments, and just kind of thinking about like, you know, when your rocket's getting ready to be launched, you're gonna like have drinks at the bar and like hang out. This is the little terrace overlooking the launch. So you'd have a drink, hang out, watch rocket launches. This kind of helical stair off to the side is down below now. We're looking at from the assembly floor, which is behind us, which actually is packed with all kinds of high-tech instrumentation and manufacturing devices for the actual building of the rockets. And this is it in kind of totality. On the left is that mission control. The center is the clean room with the lounge above. And we're standing on the assembly floor where typically, again, it would have a lot of different types of machines, cafeteria. So this project was also never realized due to some Saudi government not committing investments to Virgin Orbit. So, you know, we're now down 2 projects, right? 2 that we really wanted to build, and we're like, okay, what the fuck now? Like, when are we ever gonna get to build something? And so, you know, this is again like phase 1. What did we learn? You know, we're keeping really large overhead, including staff on board. Means like sometimes you're gonna have to go after work you don't really want to do to keep all this staff, and that doesn't really serve the ambition of the office. You know, the other thing is like every new typology like this one, which is really complex because you have all these like clean rooms and ante-rooms and airlocks and whatever. You're spending a ton of time just understanding how to deal with new typologies, new types of projects. And you're not spending that time or that money or the fee actually designing or actually building or producing the design of the project. So, you know, it comes down to like kind of like realizing what you want and what it would take to get there. Sometimes like it doesn't pencil, and that the ego or the drive or whatever it is versus the reality of practice can sometimes be at odds with one another. And so I think like in my case, what I wanted was being also in the paint. Like I wanted to design every day. I wanted to like produce these projects, but I'm caught between client meetings and managing a team and trying to figure out HR or whatever it is, right? And I'm not in the paint. I'm not doing the design. I'm like here and there and whatever. And to me, that's not really what I wanted to do. And Virgin and projects like it are also, they're really exciting, but they have a larger canvas to work with. But like to pull them off, you need an experienced staff. So, you know, there's kind of this like point where you're like, okay, maybe I can't take on these kinds of projects anymore. I have to kind of shift my office. So in 2018, I was like, okay, I'm gonna move away from trying to take on all these different types of projects and really concentrate efforts on residential. And I was thinking, you know, we're sort of struggling to pay for these big teams, like we're gonna pare it down a little bit. It also felt really precarious trying to chase the work, and you're kind of walking this like tightrope. So residential felt like something that seemed better because also you could pare down the team, I could be in the paint more, and so we decided to start focusing on mid to high-end homes, and also start doing a little bit of housing research, which was something we were interested in that was about potentially doing development on our own, but also trying to understand LA's housing problems and trying to come up with some solutions there. So pared down the team. I'm now in the paint more often and also providing more kind of in-depth on-site construction admin. We're starting to carry out research into housing typologies and different models of production and development. And at the time, I was also involved in, I was more involved in the design work, but I was also starting to teach at USC and Cal Poly, which was starting to stretch my time as well. So this is a really early project. It kind of fits in a little bit earlier than 2018, but it taught me a lot. I think it was around 2016. It shaped my practice because we really collaborated with the clients, and they were like super emotionally invested in the project, and they had a tiny budget. It was also a tiny house. It's about 800 square feet, and we wanted to really maximize the small house by allowing it to kind of open up to the gardens and kind of try to figure out ways to take a really small footprint and make it feel really large. And so we did that with light and then openings to the gardens and some other kind of tricks I'll show you in the next slides. So this is the ground floor plan. It has 2 large sliding glass doors, one on kind of down south and then one to the east, both open onto the garden. And then the upper story is just a simple bedroom, lofted bed, and then the stair that's coming up is a double height space that kind of wraps around to the kitchen. And this is the house. It's super simple, structural frame, exterior tropical hardwood, rain screen, stucco base. The husband was a metal fabricator, and we collaborated pretty deep on these sliding glass doors, the stair, and a few of the windows that he made. And the volume kind of floats above the lower base, and the spaces, again, like they open up, that sliding glass door opens up, and then to the left is another one of those kind of little garden rooms. And we were able to build this for $200,000 back in 2016, which sounds maybe like a lot, but in LA it's totally remarkable. This is that kind of garden room. This is kind of the living space looking out into that garden room. This is that steel stair that the owner fabbed. Dogs seem to really like it. And this is that second story space, a little lofted bedroom. And so we have this like really rough areas of the house, and they kind of meet these more refined elements on the interior, and it's kind of a nice contrasting space, really good light. And then on the kind of flip side, you know, we're working on like these higher end houses. So developers approached us, and they wanted us to take like this existing ranch home in Bel Air and reimagine it as a 2-story home with a large pool. And it's a half-acre site, and it's got these amazing views of the mountains. And this is they wanted like a 7,000 square foot house with 5 bedrooms, 7 baths, and again, this kind of infinity edge pool. And we didn't really want to stick with the original footprint, but there's really great incentives to do a remodel versus ground up, particularly in Bel Air, because you don't have to go through a specific plan. You can just like go straight to building. And it's also faster and cheaper for the permitting process. So we kind of had to stay within that. The house was originally kind of this horseshoe shape, and then we really were interested in privacy, but also openness, because it has all these amazing views in the back, but then it's kind of a busy street in the front. We wanted to be able to break apart the building and both using kind of the roof and the facades to do that. And we have this kind of indoor atrium. You can see that puncture at the roof at the top left. It goes down and connects to the pool level, as well as the primary suite. You can kind of see that in section. So that's that little atrium space connecting to the primary suite. It's triple height. Considering the basement is a basement, but it also has this it also shares the view onto the mountains. So this is how it stacks up. You've got the basement level, theater, game room, and this is the ground floor. So you can start to see the entry off to the right where the garage is. It's starting to kind of break apart there. There's kind of this oblique wall, and the front door is hidden from the street. And then you come in, there's a 2-story atrium space, and there's a guest suite at the top, pool, bar, and some services. And then down left is, or down bottom is the kitchen living, or kitchen and dining. And then up top, you have all the guest rooms, plus the primary suite at the north. And then you see that bridge connecting the two wings of the building. And this is the result. You see we have this kind of like oversized roof structure with these cuts. And the cuts allow light down into the gardens, but also they kind of play with light and shadow as it kind of moves across through the day on the facades. And this is the view I was talking about. You know, on a really good day, you see the Santa Monica Mountains, and then you see the Pacific. And just off to the left, you can see the Getty Center. So if you kind of know LA, like the Getty's off, you know, 405, so you can kind of place where this building would be. And this is the front facade. So we have, everything's kind of broken apart. The roof lifts off the front facade. We have these cuts showering light down. You have this kind of layering effect of walls passing one another, and it's really breaking up the facade. And this was aesthetics, but this was also a way to increase, because in these areas, space, even though 7,000 is really big, like everybody wants a bigger house. And if you shift the planes of the building, you can actually get a bonus in your zoning. So we got a 15% bonus by kind of playing with the depths of the walls at the front of the house. This is the entry, kind of looking back away from the entry. There's that roof void. And then that's the entry to the home. And then you come into this double height space, and you kind of get this like mimicking of the roof kind of peeling back and that void, and then it's it kind of doubled or amplified by the geometry of the bridge coming across. So you get these like patterns that kind of reemerge in the atrium space. That's it again, with the stair up to the second level. And you see the light starting, you get these like nice patterns from the voids kind of cutting across the facade on the left. And that's it from the second level, looking out to the pool and the Santa Monica's. So it was really important for us to organize the house. So you're always getting a view of the mountains, you're always getting a view onto the pool, and they're always kind of connected. You're always rotating around the outdoor space. This house ended up selling for like $11 million to a Nike exec. And so this is our housing research. So we're kind of in parallel. We're like doing these houses, and we're also kind of thinking like, okay, what's the situation in LA? Like, can we build these kind of higher end houses? Use some of those funds to kind of, you know, fund our interest. And part of the interest of the office was affordable housing, or thinking about ways that we could build, you know, inexpensively and contribute to some level. Solutions for the housing market. So LA City has all these different sites sprinkled across the town, which they own, and they don't know really what to do with. They're looking for developers, or they're looking to partner with somebody. So we started identifying certain lots that we thought were interesting, and also, you know, overlaid on this is like the LA River, the future metro lines, and some of the green spaces. And depending where you're triangulated in those things, there's like additional housing or zoning incentives for additional housing units or square footage bumps. So in this slide, we're starting to zero in on those sites and really starting to do studies. So some of these lots are single lots, and some of them are multiple. They're like stacked together. So we're trying to think of like, could we lot tie them? Could we have like a system that, you know, bridged across multiple lots? Could we partner with them and like buy a bunch of lots? Could we buy the lots? Could we like, you know, present an idea to the city? And so we started coming up with like different typologies that may fit on these. And one of the things we started looking at were these kind of little small like aggregate buildings. And these would be like prefab or modular kind of construction. And we're really, one of my favorite kind of things in LA is like these early garden style apartments that were like 1930s and 1950s, and they were always well landscaped, they were modest, they fit into the neighborhood context, and they were like really nice little apartments. And so the thought was having these kind of aggregates across single or multiple lots, you could kind of create that privacy with something kind of unique, but also that these could be added over time. So maybe like a phased approach, you know, you get some equity out of a couple units and then add something later on. So this is like a first stab at 2 units, and the idea being that, you could buy the first unit, as your family grew, maybe you add the back unit, but really the concept was these could also be closed off easily, and you could use some of the spaces to rent out later. Like in a way, it was kind of trying to think through kind of a flexible system, and you'd have shared gardens, shared community space, kind of also shared amenities. And so they're kind of these stacked little volumes that kind of twist and move across the site. And a lot of it was organized around the idea of not being able to look at your neighbor or, oriented a certain way so you have privacy. So still having a sense of community, but also prioritizing outdoor spaces. Simultaneously, we started working with this consultant that had this ability to take steel coils and manufacture them into metal studs. And the idea was he was kind of you would build a model and you'd output it, and he would make the studs the exact length you needed for building. And so we started thinking about maybe a rapid prototype system that was also kind of rapid, but also mass customized for small ADUs or smaller houses. And steel framing is really great because, if it's done on site like this, we have zero waste. You can be really precise in the manufacturing. It's insect proof, it's rot proof. You have higher fire resistance, and it's very, very fast. So we started coming up with ideas about little ADUs. So this is around the time that the ADU provision was released in LA. So we're looking at the most minimal thing you could tuck in your backyard and rapidly produce. And so this is a 500 square foot little efficiency unit, bed, bath, kitchen, and kind of positioned so you have a little room for garden. And we're thinking about all the little elements that go into this, the built-in Murphy bed, casework, modular furniture, and really trying to design this in a way that we would kind of have complete control of every element in the space, kind of a turnkey solution. And thinking again, through every little element that would take to kind of make this thing or assemble it, right? So working through the whole assembly process and really drilling down into that. So, we're iterating on ideas of construction. We're thinking about how to deploy things. We're doing some research. We're doing these high-end houses. And at the end of phase 2, some of the lessons we learned were that end users, i.e. residential clients, they're much more emotionally invested in getting the project done, and they're also emotionally invested in good architecture. And so we saw a much higher rate of completion of our projects. But the large high-end houses still took a team. They took a team to sustain, and that's substantial overhead, and it's you're still managing things. And I'm wanting to be in the paint, right? And it's always how do you sort of manage the team and still be in the paint? So the experimentation, though, with residential projects kind of allowed different ways to think about self-initiated building and thinking about my own interest in development. And so that was kind of really helpful knowledge. And then, this kind of research, it can really carry ideas into places that are often unexpected from the original intent of the research. All right, so phase 3. We're now in 2019. I'm still chasing a bunch of work. So we have some large multifamily projects on the horizon, 2 large high-end homes, and some smaller homes, and we're kind of hoping these things will land. I'm carrying some staff. We're this is gonna work, right, guys? And then 2020, pandemic, oh shit, we're done. It's just everything stopped. And so now I'm at this critical moment of what do we do? How do we move forward? What's gonna happen? And my office just couldn't sustain the loss of work. So I started downsizing. I started searching my soul for meaning, and really started thinking about what is the practice I want? Truly, what do I want out of practice? And this is kind of a blessing or a curse at this point, but the pandemic had kind of given me room to revisit what kind of practice I wanted and how I wanted to pursue architecture for myself. So, eventually the whole thing wound down, and I was back to me just me, hucking architecture out of the back of my car. You know, I've got the ability to take on outside consultants if, like, you know, we get more work. So I have this way to sort of hedge larger projects should they come. But I was like, I'm going to do this on my own for a little while and see how this goes. But I was also interested in, like, you know, I wanted value for myself, and you know, I wanted to be able to think about, like, value, like, what is value, right? Like, for me, value is like being able to sustain myself creatively, but also financially. And so we have been always kind of iterating on little, like, projects in the office, like little stools and like little, you know, like that. The ADU had all this modular furniture, and we had, like, rapid prototyped, but, you know, 3D printed all these, like, little furniture ideas. I was like, I'm gonna just start, like, doing some furniture on my own. There's nothing going on with the pandemic. I had some small projects, and I was like, I'm gonna buy a lathe, I'm gonna do some stuff. And this whole thing started in kind of an art practice. And that gave me kind of a different way of thinking about architecture, but also thinking about things I really wanted to do. So I wanted to also start thinking, like, well, maybe long term, I wanted a creative practice that also includes an art practice. But I also started to become really interested in, like, can I make my own projects? You know, can I self-develop? Like, what does that really look like? And I started kind of drilling into that. Like, how am I going to get money? Like, I don't have a whole lot of money. What am I going to do? Like, go out on the street? Well, yeah, I'm going to go out on the street. I'm going to start asking people for money. So in 2021, I scraped together whatever funds I could to make my own projects. I negotiated loans against my house. I reached out to family and friends. I was like, hey, you got anything you want to throw at this? And I started pitching ideas about some development in LA. And, you know, I was seeking out investors both from friend network and old client relationships. And so I came up with some kind of guidelines for what I wanted to do. These are limited to 3 or 4 unit developments. I wanted to buy a site with an existing unit because, again, very tight on funds, but if I bought an existing unit, I could also rent it out during the phases of construction and design. And this is going to be housing aimed at the creative class. I'm not trying to solve, like, any kind of housing issue, but I was thinking the creative class in LA has always struggled to find housing. We love beautiful spaces, right? We really appreciate design, but oftentimes we end up with, like, these crappy little apartment units. So, and I have a lot of friends that have moved to LA recently, and they're like, we can't find anything to rent, everything's shit. So I really wanted, that was like my interest. And so I started also developing kind of a limited zoning menu of options. So I'd worked on a lot of hillside houses at this point. They all ran over budget. They were all really precarious because you never knew where you were going to find the soils. So hillside homes are out. No historic preservation stuff because it limits the aesthetics potential. It also limits the development potential. No neighborhoods that require extensive planning review. Flat lots were like, yes, please, flat lots. They have easy access for construction, teams, and for staging. Lots that can be easily divided. Again, going back to that idea of having the existing house and then severing some part of the lot for the new construction. No existing tenants. I didn't want to kick out anybody, so these houses had to be empty. And, just generally be a human. Like, don't gentrify, don't, do weird shit with the scale and context. Like, be a human, be a good person. So I ran through, like, dozens of performas. So I'm spreadsheeting, I'm doing these, like, 3D things, and I'm costing them out. I'm seeing what the potential is. I probably went through, 2 or 3 dozen sites, and each one I would look at it this way. I would see what our maximum zoning envelope looked like, park it. I would figure out, how much we could build there. Does it fit into the context? And then what's our real kind of, what's our pro forma look like immediately, and what does our pro forma look like 5 years out, right? If we have long-term tenants. And the idea was to hold these things. It's not to flip. It's to buy something, hold it, have rental income. And so we found this little house. It's in Cypress Park, and this is like midway 2022. This house is from 1905, and it was moved there in 1915. I have no idea how. That's still very unclear to me. The site's located in the Cypress Park neighborhood, and it's got the things I wanted. It was close close to the freeway. It's close to a metro station. The Gold Line's just behind it, so parking's not required. And my home is roughly half a mile away in Mount Washington, so just a little jump. And I really like the idea of investing in places also where I live. And I was thinking about also the way the neighborhoods were changing and what kind of housing, people would need there. And again, thinking about the creative class. And so I really was like, okay, wherever this is located, it also needs to make sense for where the creative class wants to live. And Cypress Park is going through this nuanced kind of change right now. It is gentrifying. So I try not to be the gentrifier, but it's already in progress. There's coffee shops and restaurants all kind of popping up. And this is the lot. On the left is Figueroa Boulevard. It's a very 4-lane boulevard. Next to us is an auto body shop. And so the little red pin is the new duplex, and then the brown roof is the existing house. And so it's this corner lot, which is awesome because, again, we can close that front house off. We can stage from Amabel Street all of our construction and go slide right in. So it's this dream. It's super easy. The only thing is, we got an auto body shop next door. We got a Figueroa Boulevard to deal with. So I began thinking about this house really needs to be kind of a sanctuary. And so the front house, I basically went in 40 days and redid all the landscaping. So on the left is existing, on the right is new. And within 60 days of close of the property, we had a renter. This is the new duplex. So again, I'm bootstrapping all the funds I could muster into this thing. I did some of the work by myself, some of the millwork. I built this fence up front, and we did it for just under $400,000, which I know sounds like a lot of money, but again, this is pretty remarkable in the LA market. It's not without compromises, but these are compromises on my own terms, which is both easier and harder. But I resolved to stay within the neighborhood context of kind of a modest, mostly one-story structure. And this is a 1,450 square foot duplex. And on the right is a single family, so it's zoned single family. On the left is an ADU. So on the right, the single family has to conform to the specific plans. It has this front door facing the street. And on the left is the ADU, which doesn't have to comply. And it can also be slightly bigger, has less setbacks. So there's these kind of two different buildings, right? And so you're kind of playing with, the facade is kind of designed to subtly contrast. And then we have this unifying feature of the stucco down below. And then, of course, the bright pink kind of unifies the two volumes. But again, playing with shadow and light to differentiate them, but also elevating the materials. This is all really inexpensive stuff. On the left is T111 siding, again, stucco. On the right's all hardy board. And then the front fence is rough cut cedar. And this is it's a really simple structure to build, and this is part of it. When I sit down with a structural engineer, I was like, hey, what's the, I was kind of thinking of the shape, and I was thinking about the demising wall building being down the middle. I was like, what's our roof spans look like? How can we have just slab on grade, demising wall, single span joist? Can we do this with this span or whatever? So it was really about creating a real simple box, a really simple thing to construct, and a really inexpensive way of delivering space. So the new building has that gable shape, and it kind of keeps a lower profile than even the existing bungalow. And we're trying to really contextualize it within the neighborhood, but also make it different. Right? We painted it bright pink, right? It's it's very different from everything around it, but also the same. On the interior, keeping the roof joists exposed adds a warmth. It's also a cost-saving feature. We don't have drywall up there, which adds weight, which would also increase the framing loads. We also don't have paint. But aesthetically, you get these really nice lines that kind of vault the ceiling further up, and then we have these walls that kind of, they just barely touch the joist and they kind of float below. We got a polished concrete floor, which is also the slab on grade. So again, we don't have wood, we don't have additional, finish there, so we saved on that cost. I built these cabinets. These are Baltic birch, and those little pulls are actually instant cedar from the Angeles forest that I pulled out of the woods, turned on my lathe, and then IKEA cabinets, natural stone, and just a pretty simple simple space. This is the hallway going down towards the kitchen, so we have these skylights that are bringing in a lot of light to make it feel larger than it is. And again, we got this 4-lane boulevard. We've got this auto body shop next door, which is just behind this wall that you're looking at. And so again, it's like this house really needed to be kind of a sanctuary or feel like a sanctuary. And this is achieved through the light that I was speaking of, the warmth of the interior, but also these views. Every view out, every window looks on the landscape. So either in this case, you're looking onto kind of the garden there. In other areas, this is creative class, this is an industrial designer that ended up renting the space. This is the kitchen, natural stone, and then that's that little landscape feature out the windows. So here we have natural stone, we've got the aluminum windows, we've got the Baltic birch, so really trying to keep as many natural materials in the space as possible. And this project was just published in Dwell this month, and they allotted it for the $400,000, which again, I understand is like a lot of money, but the fact that they kind of picked it up and published it was like, oh, this is like proof of concept. We did it, right? We did a thing, and I thought it was done for a good number. And then, Dwell does a lot of these budget breakdowns, and they're like, this is well within kind of the things we're seeing in the LA market, if not below. And so, I started thinking, and I debated on whether I was going to show this to you guys, but I think like what I created was actually like I just wanted to create some housing for the creative class, but I was like, this is actually a countermeasure to what's been happening in LA for quite some time. I love Michael Maltzan, no shade to Michael Maltzan. I think he's an amazing architect, big fan of his work. This is Star Apartments. The developer was Skid Row Housing Trust. And they collapsed in 23 due to financial mismanagement, lack of leadership, and unsustainable financial structures. And the city actually took over 29 of their buildings. So this project was modular, took about 3.5 years to complete. It's comprised of 105 studio units. Those studio units are 350 square feet each, and they're like these efficiency units, right? Each unit cost $390,000, and they took nearly 3 years to build. My whole building project, with total 1,450 square feet, comprised of 2 units, costs roughly the same. So, do what you will. On the left is 700 square foot, one of my units. On the right is one of the units in Star Apartments. And I don't think this is Maltzan's fault. I think there's a lot of other issues. Part of it is the overlay of all the requirements for affordable housing makes the design process long, all these additional weird requirements that California and LA pack into these projects makes them expensive. And, the expense makes these kind of spaces, right? But still, you got to question, I'm a scrappy little single architect developer guy, but I squeeze a lot out of my project. And can we kind of think about new models of development out there? Maybe they're not these big institutional developments that are solving some of these housing issues. Maybe those scrappy little things like me, 3 to 5 units kind of percolating and happening in these in-between spaces that we already have in the city that are underutilized. And thinking about the fires and thinking about what I produced and people underwater with their insurance, it's a real problem. And Altadena, speaking of the creative class, is full of artists, designers, tons of architects live out there. And I just think we need a new housing model. And these little scrappy units, I think, could be a ticket. All right, so I'll get off my high horse. I'm going to talk a little bit about my art practice here. I grew up in craft. My mom was a ceramicist. I'm from North Carolina originally, and she had a little pottery studio that my dad built her at the house, and she worked out of there. My dad did stained glass, and so I've always kind of been in between craft, architecture, and art. And because I kind of oscillate between architecture and art, I'm always reminded of Robin Evans' translations from drawings to buildings. And he said the difference between an architect and an artist is that an artist works in the medium and an architect works at the medium. And meaning the artist is in the bronze, the clay, you know, the paint, right? And the architect is working through kind of an intermediary kind of thing, the drawings, to make the building. And so my question is and has been, so what happens when you do both? So this is Tom. I'm going to bring Tom in because you guys didn't get to see him tonight. But you know, he had always had like kind of an art practice that paralleled his studio practice. And this is a digital model. These are called dwaddles. We can argue about the name. But Tom was simultaneously running an architecture studio and always doing these things on the side. And there's kind of an overlap. There's a cross-pollination of ideas between the architecture studio and these art pieces. And I think it really, you know, these were like investigations of language that he was interested in. And, you know, he's cutting, splicing, subtracting, adding to make these things in the computer. And then they're kind of output as these 3D prints that then have surface treatments. And this one's like kind of rusted out, right? And you can see, this is Tour Far. This is an atrium I worked on for like 2 years of my life. And you see that language, right? There's kind of or I see it, maybe you don't see it, but I see it. And there's kind of this like back and forth between the art practice and the architecture practice in terms of the language that Tom's using. And sometimes we'd even, in the studio, we would take his art pieces and actually begin competitions, like pulling language out of the art piece and like putting it in a building. It didn't work, but it was a way to like generate ideas. And so I've kind of been thinking about like my own trajectory and, you know, some of the history or some of the history of other folks has kind of helped me like frame maybe where my practice is going or what I'm doing. And this is J.B. Blunk. He was up in Northern California in Inverness. And this is his home and studio. And, you know, he built his own house out of trees that were felled on his land. And his sculptures are, you know, this is one up front in front of his house. And there's like this nice dialogue between house, sculpture, and the landscape, right? And that was something, you know, he's like pulling these trees out, he's like making things. But he's also having his house like kind of enmeshed in his sculptural practice. This is a sink that's in the house that he built. And so home and studio are really like enmeshed in a creative practice and a labor of making. Noguchi and Blunk actually met in Japan just after Blunk had left UCLA's art program, and they always kept in touch. And there's kind of a similar but different approach to both. Blunk was very local in context, and then Noguchi was like really far-reaching, right? But my favorite quote from Noguchi, and I'll read it here, is "Useless architecture, useful sculpture." And the phrase kind of encapsulates Noguchi's idea that architectural forms and concepts can be used to create powerful, resonant sculptures that don't necessarily serve a traditional functional purpose, but still hold deep significance. You know, and a lot of his work uses elements like columns and these kind of like rooting kind of structures that mimic architecture, but also they're more aesthetic and they're more symbolic. And have these like different qualities over just pure function. Up top is the plaza in Costa Mesa that he did, and down below is actually in LA. It's the JACC, the Japanese American Cultural Center. This is me in my studio. This is 2020-ish. I started this art practice focusing on sculpture and semi-functional objects in wood. And my work often kind of oscillates between architectural forms and kind of natural forms. And it really it grew out of my desire, like I said earlier, to just make something with my hands during the pandemic. And after going through the trauma of trying to figure out an office that never quite worked, and to just have the access to pick up something and make it, and have an idea and execute and not be constrained by architecture. But kind of like Noguchi and Blunk, my work is sculptural, it's functional, and it kind of plays off of one another and the spaces that they occupy. And I'm always trying to like kind of wrestle meaning out of them, but working on them in their kind of their own terms, meaning I'm kind of thinking about how they occupy a space or complement or contrast or group together to kind of create a significance. I pull permits with the local forestry department, and I drive up into the surrounding forests of LA. And I really enjoy this kind of physicality of getting these logs around. And it's something I'm kind of comfortable with and used to from days in my parents' studios. But this is my Tacoma. It's doing the best work right now. And I refer to this as under trucking. And it probably, unlike me, does not like this at all. Around the same time as I started my art practice, I started getting really into ultralight backpacking and venturing into the Eastern Sierras. And I go solo because no one else wants to go with me. I don't know if they don't like me or just that they hate the outdoors, but no one goes with me, so I end up going solo. But this is a picture of Doozy Basin. It's about 11,000 feet. And the Sierras are really interesting in terms of landscape. They are as old as the Alps, but the Alps are they're like this, right? They're all these really steep pitches. But again, this is 11,000 feet, but it's a basin. So there's all these flat areas you can explore with lakes and rivers nestled into these mountains. And so the Sierras never received the same amount of precipitation, so the glacial activity was just less. This is my little 13-ounce solo tent. I could probably give a whole lecture about architecture and ultralight gear, or maybe just on ultralight gear. I don't know. It's really fun. And I started trying to figure out routes up there, and I came across Kim Stanley Robinson, who actually I loved previously because he had written a great book called Ministry of the Future on climate change and the sort of socio-political related issues to climate change. But he has spent, he thinks, over a year outside in the Sierras camping. He lives in Davis. And he wrote this book called A Sierra Love Story. And there's some really great meditations. There's also, he gives you routes to go on eastern and western approaches. But this idea, contentment, happiness, bliss, being high in the mountains. And you are high, by the way, because you're high in elevation. You're also high because you have no oxygen. But it's more than just physiological. It has to do with wildness and beauty. It's an effect of history and a manifestation of the sublime. And there is certainly something special up there. I mean, the light, there's nobody around. You're kind of in this pristine environment. And it really does have an emotional effect. And up there, I typically take a lot of photos and kind of catalog different elements that I find, things like the places that I see that have an emotional kind of value to me. And, I'm looking at, mountains, rocks, lakes, rivers and trees, how the light works up there. And in some ways the formal too, the tactile nature of things, materiality of things, the mass, the space around things. Geology is a big part, obviously, being up there. And I bring these into the studio and I further examine them. This is patterns of erosion on a tree, and I'm looking at, again, the tactile element of it, the space within an object, thinking about the passage of time. This is something that comes to mind when you look at wood or stone, right? And where's this object been? What has it seen? How does light work with this thing? And then there's just all these kind of questions that come to mind. And then I start thinking about this, and it gets me kind of in the studio working, not recreative, but kind of intuitively guiding the form to some kind of level of completion based on these experiences, based on this catalog of elements. And I'm looking and kind of thinking about grain, shape, the way something's cut. Is it smooth? Is it variegated? The texture of a thing, how light and shadow plays across an object, how the mass is held. And this is Deodar cedar. This is what I call a cross-sectional landscape. And form here is much more intuitive. It's kind of informed by the materiality of the thing. So I'm looking at again, grain and knots and imperfections. And these things start to guide the next move. The next piece of language kind of comes out of the imperfections of the material. This is a more functional object. This is a side table. And this is recalling kind of the ranges and landscapes around the Sierra. And I kind of like the way these objects start to play against the hard edges of architecture. They're kind of like an other, right? So this is inspired by the kind of softness of some of the weathered basins up there. Some of these basins are like marble. They even have a slight reflective quality to the floor of the basins. And then they have these pock marks from where like something got lodged in the glacier and dug out a chunk of it. And then sort of like in opposition to these forms are these columnar elements that I make on the lathe. This is a 6-foot tall by 8-inch piece of incense cedar. I found this in the Angeles Forest, not 45 minutes from my house. And these are hard-edged objects. And the form here is like, the other ones are more intuitive and I'm kind of feeling my way through them. This, the form is like, is kind of known and impressed upon the material. And so this is called Meridian. It's also DLR cedar. And I'm kind of thinking about the relationship of my objects to architecture and like the spaces that they occupy, and how they're kind of tactile and they have maybe a deeper connection to the place and time that is outside the building that they're in. And I think like looking at them, you kind of recall maybe something else that's not there, not in the building, but somewhere far off. And so, you know, oscillating kind of between the hard edges of the built environment and some of the softer lines that I work in, I found, you know, it kind of offers me a new way of looking at form making and the creative process. And so my work is not yet kind of enmeshed totally in my architectural practice as a kind of formal way, but it does cultivate kind of meaning for me, and I draw upon this creative practice of sculpture to have freedom to explore form and making without the constraints of architecture. So kind of like, you know, doing what the hand can do, what drawings cannot. And this is another really favorite writer of mine, Rebecca Solnit. She wrote this really wonderful book on Orwell's Roses. And the book is really kind of a biography of Orwell's huge, long history of political involvement, but also he was like really into gardens and loved roses. And so Rebecca says, you know, a garden is a result of culture describing nature. A garden is what you want and can manage and afford. And what you want is who you are. And who you are is always a political and cultural question. And I can see this quote really applying deeply to the practice of art and architecture. In many ways, as my practice has evolved, so has my political and cultural understandings of it, each kind of informing the other. You know, we have the power to shape and challenge traditional models of practice. And my evolution as both an artist and architect has unfolded through iterating on the ideas, conceptual and built, but pushing me to continually reinvent and re-envision what practice can be. So kind of what I'm doing is not dissimilar from cultivating a garden. In fact, like each project, building, and space kind of holds a cultural or political value that reflects who I am and what I want. You know, working through ideas, buildings, and sculpture creates the conditions for a practice itself to grow and change and evolve. This space is not of fixed outcomes, right? But of ongoing cultivation. Thank you, everyone. Questions?
I think it's clear the way you talk about your work phases to us. I'll ask this super question. Do you miss working on fancy building color glass boxes?
Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah. I mean, it's really exciting, right? I mean, you're working on icons in like far off places. It's exciting, but what I realize is like it comes at a cost. You know, like you can't. If you want to do it on your own, you got to build an office to get there, and that's going to cost you certain things in your life to do that. And you may not get there. You may just like me, just continually lose projects, and then, you know, and it's not because you don't want the projects or you didn't do a good job. It's like these things are out of your hands, right? And so I think about that all the time. Like the canvases that you get with a large-scale project, you're not going to get at my little duplex, you know, and it is sort of not satisfying in some ways, but on the other hand, the small scale stuff for me has like a real emotional attachment, and I found a way to create the kind of value there along with my art practice to sort of satisfy. And that's why I think where I brought up like value, you know, like what's the value that you want? And so there's always like a compromise to that value. And I think like I'm trying to like balance a sort of value system for myself, and I think having this art practice, doing the smaller developments has sort of done that for me.
Are you trying to influence LA and how they do their housing? So it's more like your style?
I mean, I don't know if I'm trying to influence LA. I think LA's got their heads up their asses, to put it lightly. There's so many, like Malton's project, and again, like I love Malton. I don't think it's his fault. Like a lot of these affordable housing projects have like a laundry list of all these requirements that have nothing to do with actual housing, that have nothing to do with the services they provide. They're just like, you need to hire, certain people to work at certain wages, or which are good policies, but you're not free to actually go out and like build the way you want to build quickly. Sorry, wages was probably not the right term, but like you have to hire like unionized, or you have to hire, certain, or whatever. I can't remember all the different like laundry lists they had, but it was just brought up to me recently that some of these requirements are attached to affordable housing that have to be satisfied before you can even get to the permitting process. So it's like you have all these administration tasks that just lengthen the process. So I was thinking at a smaller scale, you don't have the baggage that the institutions have, and you can just move freer and quicker.
If you didn't live in Los Angeles, where would you live?
It's a good question. I'm always thinking about that. Because, I always say, like, LA is, like, it's not the best of anything, but it's really good at a lot of things. You got the beach, you got the mountains, you have a lot of opportunity to do cool stuff, but it's really expensive. And I moved there in 2003. It was a different city. The homeless stuff has always been there to some degree, but like Tom and I were talking about today, it's like, it feels untenable with the fires. It feels really fragile. I was in my house, 100-mile-an-hour wind gusts, watching Altadena burn from my living room, and and transformers are blowing up down the street from me next to trees, and you're just going, oh shit, we're next, And that's not like a great feeling. But LA also has this, the West has always been, full of problems like this. Like it's always been arid. So we've had a shortage of water. We've always had earthquakes, but it also has this like kind of magic to it. Like anything can still happen. It's sort of like this Hollywood glamour thing. But I'd probably live in Northern California if I wasn't living in LA. Yeah. Maybe Mendocino, maybe a small town. I don't know. Yeah. All right. Thanks, y'all. We're good?
Thank you, Hunter. That was awesome. All right, we have one lecture left this year, and it's supposed to happen on November 4th. So hopefully we can see you for the last lecture. Anna Ives, she's a partner at Pattern Ives in St. Louis. So thanks, everyone.